Hey everybody, Matt Johnston here with another COVID-19 legal update. So this week's Friday Focus, we are talking about contracts. And one of the things that's happened to me as a contract attorney and as an attorney who advises small business owners is that there's an awful lot of questions about the force majeure contract, or more specifically the force majeure clause within the contract. And there's a shocking number of people who are learning that the force majeure clause is not exactly what they thought it was going to be. It's not providing the protection that they thought it was going to be available. And many of the force majeure clauses, people have been attempting to invoke them and finding out that the other party won't work with them on it, and it presents a bit of a problem. At the same time, there's a lot of requests that I'm receiving and fielding to modify or change the force majeure clauses in light of COVID-19 and the actions that have been taken by governments in the wake of the pandemic. So one of the things that I want to talk about first is the general structure of what a force majeure clause should, and in my opinion, must include. The first of those is the conditions in which the force majeure may be invoked. Now you can have a very general force majeure clause that says any outside force, action, activity beyond the control of the parties that renders it impossible to perform the contract or renders it impractical or generally difficult or frustrates the purpose of the contract. So things that would fall into that category would be a public health emergency that results in government ordered closures of businesses. That's the one that most people are asking me to add to their list of things. You could also go the other route and list out a whole bunch of things. So oftentimes things that are included in a force majeure contract are things like fire, flood, earthquake, strike or other labor disturbance, war, riot, things like that that make it impossible for somebody to perform. The difficulty with that is that there is a contract interpretation term that says, or there's a contract interpretation doctrine that says that if the item is not in the list, it may be excluded, because the parties could have added the item into the list. Depending upon where you are, some states may say okay or not. You could add in at the end of your list or any other condition outside the control of the parties that renders it impossible to perform the contract. And then you're just getting into a lot of extra words. But in general, you need to define the conditions in which the force majeure clause may be invoked. The second thing, and this is vitally important, is a notice provision. So the party that's going to invoke the force majeure clause needs to provide notice to the other person or the other party. And usually that has to be done as soon as practicable, which is more stringent than as soon as practical or as soon as possible. As soon as practicable. And you may have to figure out some ways of making that happen, whether that's a phone call, a text message, an email, a formal letter, whatever. There needs to be some sort of notice, because you need to put the other party on notice that they are going to be subject to this provision in the force majeure clause, and that you may be looking to avoid or delay or outright not perform on the contract. So you do have to provide notice. The third part, and this one is often missing, is what are the parties going to do once the force majeure clause is invoked? Are they going to simply walk away? Is there going to be some sort of conference, some sort of dispute resolution governed by a dispute resolution provision in the contract? I don't know. And the parties are free to sort of choose what they want to do. But a force majeure clause in a contract is not necessarily going to be your best safety provision. It is a fallback provision for things that are beyond the control of the parties. So the question then becomes, if something like a government shutdown or a government mass closing of businesses, does that apply? And the reason why that's a big question is there's an awful lot of businesses that we have learned can operate remotely and can perform contracts remotely. Some contracts are obviously going to be easier to deliver on remotely than others. For example, if you have a contract to install HVAC in a building and the government has said, no, you can't do that, clearly that's not something that can be done remotely. But if you are, say, a web design firm, there's no reason why you can't work remotely. So you do have to be prepared for the fact that it has to be actually impossible or impractical in terms of finances or delivery times or something along those lines that makes it impossible or impractical to deliver on the contract. And you may be looking at a different set of dispute, not necessarily a force majeure clause getting out of it, but the other party saying, well, you can work remotely. So be prepared, and I'm a big fan of conferring between the parties to sort of figure out what is the best way of going about handling it. Do we need to modify the contract? If yes, how? And making those steps. It's far better to have the parties agreeing to something and agreeing to a modification rather than simply one party trying to walk away. I'm not saying that a walk away may not be the best course of action. It may very well be the only course of action, but at least the parties should have a conversation about it. So there is a lot of activity happening around force majeure clauses. We are working with many clients to put that together. Now, before I sign off, I do want to let folks know that we do have an option for small business owners to get the regular ability to communicate with us. We have an Ask Matt the Lawyer plan, which is basically unlimited email and scheduled phone calls for conversations to get your questions asked and get some answers about potential courses of action. If you're interested in those, give us a call, send us an email, or let us know in some other way, and we will happily get you set up on such a plan. In the meantime, be safe out there, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.